Good afternoon. So this is the third day of this very short term course. The overall idea was to give you an introduction about two different spectroscopic techniques which has enormous scope in developing into suitable technological applications, and we haven't had enough time to discuss what are the different types of applications. We were focusing only towards one particular type of application called sensing, but both UV visible and fluorescence spectroscopy has large number of applications, especially the fluorescence spectroscopy that we yesterday started our discussion. It has applications in biological field, so a lot of applications, some of them that I can briefly mention today's class. So as far as this today's class is concerned, we will just refresh some of the things that we did in the class yesterday. One is about fluorescence quenching. As we mentioned, fluorescence quenching is any phenomena that results in the decrease of fluorescence intensity or lifetime. So you have a fluorophore or a light emitting species in the system. You shine light, it is supposed to give the fluorescence as back. Sometimes what happens is that the intensity of the fluorescence will go down for some reason. We don't know the reason, but that phenomena of decreasing the fluorescence intensity is called quenching. We also said yesterday that there are two different types of quenching. One is called static quenching, another one is called dynamic quenching. As the words direct, static is a phenomena that is happening in the ground state, and dynamic is a phenomena that is happening in the excited state. So in the case of static quenching, the fluorophore and the other species, which is you can call it as quencher, both will be interacting in the ground state. Whereas in the case of dynamic quenching, the fluorophore will be in the excited state and the quencher will be in the ground state. So they interact, but the interaction for fluorophore, the interaction is happening in the excited state. That is the difference between static and dynamic. And why it is dynamic? Because most of these dynamic quenching cases, the quencher has to diffuse to the fluorophore. So there is a process of diffusion, that means movement. That is why it is called dynamic in nature. So this question was posed yesterday: how do you distinguish between static and dynamic quenching? So there were one college at least told that there is something called a Stern-Volmer analysis through which you can analyze this static or dynamic quenching. So we will just quickly go to the board now and then talk about that analysis. So Stern-Volmer plot is a plot of I0 by I versus the concentration of the species that you are adding, quencher concentration. Okay, so you are supposed to get a linear plot. So the equation is I0 by I is equal to 1 plus some constant into quencher concentration. It's like y is equal to mx plus c, a straight line equation. I is the intensity of the emitted light in the absence of quencher. That means only fluorophore if you take and you measure the intensity of the emission, that value is I0. When you add a particular amount of quencher concentration, the intensity is going to decrease. So that value is I. So for one particular addition of quencher, you will have one I. Another quencher addition, the I will be again decreasing. Since the denominator is decreasing, the ratio will increase. So you get an increasing straight line for this plot. Now if there is only one type of quenching happening, like either static or dynamic, you will get a straight line plot. But suppose both quenching is happening, then you will see that either this plot will go upward or it will go downward. It deviates from the linearity. That's why one college said that by analyzing Sternbaumer plot, you can understand whether both static and dynamic quenching is happening. But again, this intensity ratio plot will not give you much more details. If you want to really understand what is happening, we need to talk about lifetimes. So a similar kind of plot where instead of intensities, we can plot tau 0 by tau. Tau 0 is the lifetime of the fluorophore in the absence of the quencher. Tau is the lifetime of the fluorophore in the presence of quencher. Exactly like here, I0 by I, you have tau 0 by tau. So when you plot this one, you will also get supposed to get a straight line, because the equation will be tau 0 by tau is equal to 1 plus k into q. You are supposed to get a straight line with a slope of this constant. But imagine there is only static quenching happening. So now I want you to think, when static quenching happens, how does this plot get modified? So the question for you is, assume that only static quenching is happening in the system. I want you to plot tau 0 by tau versus quencher concentration. You are adding quencher concentration, you are increasing the quencher concentration system. How does this particular plot will get modified? I will request you to discuss each other and try to plot it. If you understand what is static quenching, you should be able to plot that tau 0 by tau plot for static quenching. Assume that static quenching is happening, how the tau 0 by tau versus quencher concentration plot will look like. Tau is the lifetime. We have discussed the lifetime yesterday. Tau 0 is the lifetime of the fluorophore in the absence of quencher. Tau is the lifetime in presence of quencher. And the situation is that only static quenching is happening. Okay, there is one question. Okay, that I think that is gone from here. Please type your question in the question tab.
Sir, quenching really means what, sir? I don't getting your point. What is quenching?
Sorry?
Really? What is quenching really means?
Okay, so the quenching concept is not clear. Very good. Come to the board again. You have a fluorophore and it emits when you excite with the light. Okay, assume that this is your emission spectra. When you add another substance to this system, suppose you want to detect, you want to develop a sensor, for any purpose, another species is getting added to this system, and if that results in the decrease in the emission intensity, this phenomena is called quenching. Hope it is clear now. Quenching is a process where which the fluorescence intensity is decreased in presence of another substance. Intensity also decreases, and sometimes lifetimes also get decreases. So this is the intensity, this is the time. Yesterday we said you get a single exponential decay. If you fit that, you will get lifetime, excited state lifetime, the average time that a molecule spent in the excited state. Yesterday we had the discussion of an anthracene molecule with 5 nanosecond, and we said that is the average time the molecule spent in the excited state. Sometimes that also will get decreased in presence of a quencher. Now the question to do is, if I am measuring this lifetime and I am plotting lifetime, the ratio of the lifetimes in the presence and absence of quencher, and increase the quencher concentration, what will happen to the plot if only static quenching is happening? Static quenching is the one that we defined, the interaction between the fluorophore and the quencher is happening only in the ground state, nothing is happening in the excited state. So please go back to the definition of static quenching. There was a slide, I don't know whether you are able to see that slide, I will put that back. This is the definition of static and dynamic. Try to apply this definition. How does the plot look like? The line will shift down. So one college says, PSGCT says the line will shift down. Partially correct. Is there any more precise answer? So think about this way. We are plotting the lifetimes, ratios of lifetimes in presence and absence of a quencher. Lifetime is a phenomena we defined as the average time that the molecule is in the excited state, stays in the excited state. What is static quenching? Static quenching is a phenomena happening in the ground state. So some fluorophore interact with the quencher, it forms a complex. So a fraction of the fluorophore is removed as a complex formation, only remaining is emitting. That is the reason why fluorescence is getting quenched. So that is a phenomena which is happening in the ground state, nothing to do with the excited state. In other words, static quenching will not affect the lifetime of a fluorophore. So in that case, desktop view is not showing any slide. So the static quenching, as we said in the slide, it is happening in the ground state, whereas dynamic quenching is happening in the excited state. So think about plotting the lifetimes for a static quenching case. As it is obvious, it does not affect the lifetime, because lifetime is something that is you are measuring from the excited state, and static quenching does not affect. So if you can come to the board, I can show how the plot it is. Tau 0 is the lifetime of the fluorophore in the absence of quencher. You are adding a quencher, but that quencher is not interacting with the fluorophore in the excited state, only ground state they are interacting. So tau will be only tau 0, tau 0 will not get changed. So it does not matter how much quencher you are adding, your tau is not getting changed. In other words, the ratio becomes 1 and you will get a straight line, I mean it is a line parallel to the x axis. So simply by plotting these lifetime plots, we can differentiate whether it is a static quenching or a dynamic quenching. If it is a dynamic quenching alone happening, the lifetime ratio will increase, because dynamic means they interact in the excited state, whereas a static quenching, lifetime will not get perturbed. You will get a line which is parallel to the x axis. So that is the easiest way to distinguish between dynamic quenching and static quenching. Why we are discussing about quenching? Because any sensing action is connected with the quenching mechanism. The fluorescence, see, fluorescence is a signal either on or off. So fluorescence off means quenching. So to have a detection or a sensing mechanism, you need to play around with these signals. That is why reason we are talking about quenching mechanisms. So this is the question that we discussed, how do you distinguish between static and dynamic quenching. Now reasons for quenching, this also yesterday we very briefly mentioned, even though it is broadly classified to static and dynamic, within static and dynamic there are n number of reasons for quenching. A, simple collisions leading to energy loss by heat. So a quencher molecule can come and collide with a fluorophore, that collision can exchange energy. So the fluorophore from the excited state gives energy to the quencher in the form of heat. So the fluorescence is gone, it gives out the energy in the form of a non-radiative mechanism. There are two things which are in bold, B and C, they are the most common pathways for quenching. One is called electron transfer, another one is called energy transfer, and there can be solvent interactions which lead to fluorescence quenching. There can be aggregations, there can be excimer formation, Xc plus formation. Yesterday we have seen that it can form excited state dimers or excited state complexes. So what happens is that, what is the difference between aggregation and excimers? Excimer or Xc plus is only a dimer, AA or AB, whereas aggregation means a bunch of monomers coming together and then forming the cluster. So aggregation is slightly different from excimer or Xc plus formation. If more than two species coming close and then forming a loosely bound molecular arrangement, that is called aggregation, clustering. Then what happens, the HOMO-LUMO will get interact, the dipoles of this species interacts and then HOMO-LUMO energy gap changes. So obviously fluorescence will also get affected, both absorption and emission will get affected. Xmer formation or Xc plus formation can also affect, because Xmer or Xc plus emit at a different wavelength than the monomer. So let us, out of these various reasons, electron transfer and energy transfer are the most important reasons for quenching. So for developing any fluorescence based sensor, you need to understand the mechanism of electron transfer and energy transfer. So let us go to the board. We call this photo-induced electron transfer or PET, because the whole electron transfer is initiated by light absorption, and the time scale of light absorption yesterday we discussed, it is in the femtosecond time scale. So the light energy is given to the system, the electrons absorb this energy from the photon and go to the excited states. From that excited state, it can undergo electron transfer, energy transfer, collision, so many mechanisms possible. So one of the things is photo-induced electron transfer. So we will say photo-induced electron transfer. So assume that this is the ground state, the molecule is in the ground state, you irradiate or shine light, light energy is absorbed by the molecule. What's the excited state? This is A star. So normally in photophysics, A star denotes a molecular system with high energy, in this case it's electronic energy. Now another quencher is coming, let us say Q, it interacts. Assume that A can give electron to the quencher. A is an electron rich species, Q is an electron deficient species, it can be vice versa. So if the electron transfer happens, you will form basically A plus dot and B minus dot. They are called radical cation and radical anion. And during this process, remember this axis is energy. As you can see that as a result of this electron transfer, the energy of this state is slightly reduced. Now we have a radical ion pair. Sometimes or most of the time what happens is that the transferred electron will come back to the initial position, and then you will get A back and B back. Sorry, A back and Q back. I will put Q here because Q is the one that is receiving the electron, and this process is called back electron transfer or BET. So there is a forward electron transfer which produces this radical ion pair, and there is a back electron transfer which is basically an energy wasting process, right, because you are getting the starting materials again. So most of the time so many research, so many scientists are working on, especially in solar cells and related light harvesting energy areas, the question is how do we keep this one in the excited state? Once this light energy is absorbed by the molecule, it forms an excited state and there can be a charge separation. Now the question is, we do not want them to combine back and then produce the initial starting material, which is an energy wasting process. We want to somehow keep them there so that it contains at least partial amount of the energy of these photons, because still it is in the excited state. So the question is, how do we keep this in the excited? That is one research question. But for our focus, what happened to the fluorescence of this one? Assume that this part is not there, there is no quencher. You excite the molecule, usually it gives the fluorescence back. Now the presence of a quencher, the moment you add a quencher, it interacts with the fluorophore. As a result, a fraction of the fluorophore will go in this path. There is another channel. As a direct effect, number of A star coming back to A will reduce, that means fluorescence intensity will reduce, or in other words fluorescence quenching will happen. So photoinduced electron transfer will basically results in emission quenching from this fluorophore. That is a mechanism. Now yesterday we said that each of these electronic energy levels contains so many vibrational energy levels, right. Another way of representing the same spectra or same kind of energetics is through potential energy curves. I am not sure how many of you are familiar with the potential energy curve, but the second diagram that I am going to draw here is nothing but the same state energy diagram. Let us see how I am going to draw it. I can think of something called Morse curve representation representing all of these energy states. So I can draw another diagram here. This axis is potential energy. This axis is called reaction coordinates. You are familiar with the reaction coordinates. Even in high school textbooks, this kind of graph is there, potential energy versus reaction coordinates. I think the usual graph representation I will show you here, PE versus reaction coordinates, reactants and products. This kind of graph all chemistry students are familiar. Now the question to you now is, what do you mean by reaction coordinates? So I will give you 2 minutes for you to discuss each other. I want an answer. What do you mean by reaction coordinates? BC?
Time taken by reaction.
Time taken by the reaction? Not correctly. If it is time taken by the reaction, so as the time is going down, the energy is increasing. That may not be correct. Something else is plotted there. Any other college? Okay, some other college is giving reactants, intermediates and products. Another college says how much reaction has taken place in a given time. Well, I mean, time is not coming here at all. This is not a time. By the reaction coordinates, what does it mean is, where did you hear coordinates in any other context? Coordinates, x coordinate, y coordinate, Cartesian geometry, right? Coordinate system. So here, when you say reaction coordinate, it means, assume that two atoms are interacting. So I can represent the position of this nucleus xy coordinate, x dash y dash. Now the internuclear distance, suppose they are coming close, suppose they are going far away from each other, I can represent by these coordinates. So when I say reaction coordinates, one of the things that I can represent is the internuclear distance. Similarly, bond angle, bond length. So all these parameters I can use it, which is called reaction coordinates, which is basically telling you how the reaction is, basically monitoring the reaction, but not by time, bond angle, bond length, etc. So we will come back here, how the potential energy changes as a function of reaction coordinates. That is the question. So I can represent the same energy, ground state, like a parabola. These are the vibrational energy levels. So the same electronic state I can represent like this. What I am trying to say is, this particular molecule is formed by bringing two atoms together. So the internuclear distance of these two atoms is what I am plotting here. At some point the energy is very low, it forms a chemical bond, and if you further push, repulsion happens, so the potential energy increases. So on either side it is not favorable. On at this particular position at the bottom part of this parabola, the chemical bond is happening. So this particular curve represent this state. Okay. Similarly, I can represent the above state, the excited state. These lines are the vibration energy levels. Another state representing the A plus dot, and okay, now you carefully look at it. This is A, this is A star, this is A plus dot, B minus dot. Same thing as the above. Electron was here, got excited here, you can have internal conversions, and then now this has to go to this place. So as you can see that if it travels this way, there is a barrier, it crosses this barrier and come down. So if I thickens this line, now you look at this graph and this graph, they are the same shape. In fact, they are the same. Instead of showing all the details in high schools, what they taught you is that the reactants, how it goes to product through a barrier, activation barrier. Same thing is happening here. Assume that this is a starting point, it has to climb an energy, an activation barrier, then it goes to the product side, assuming that this is the product. Now where is the activation barrier? How much activation is happening? As you can clear, this distance is the EA or activation energy. There is another parameter which is very important for this process or reactions, that is called Gibbs energy, G. This is the Gibbs energy change. Delta G. So I am sure that you have some awareness about delta G and its relation with any process. I will take a feedback from you. In your opinion, a reaction will be spontaneous when delta G becomes, come to the chat box. A reaction becomes spontaneous when delta G becomes what? Somebody is asking for, BEC is asking for a
Negatives.
yeah, so negative. PSGCT also says negative. Yes. So delta G has to be negative so that the reaction becomes spontaneous. So looking at this figure, I want you to discuss among yourself, see whether delta G of this process, what is the process? The excited state electron is moving from this energy well to this energy well. Whether this process is negative or not, delta G. It is clear from the figure, but I want you to discuss and tell me whether it is negative or not for this particular process that we are discussing. So one college represent as positive. Okay, BEC want to interact.
Negative.
Okay, one college says it is negative, one college says positive. How do we determine that? So delta G negative or positive for any process A going to B. It is calculated the Gibbs energy of B minus Gibbs energy of A. Product minus reactant. Okay. So here this is the product and this is the reactant. Look at the corresponding energies. Energies on your y axis. So this is one point, let us say B, this is A, B minus A will be positive or negative. This is energy in the increasing direction. So obviously B minus A is negative. So the answer is, for this process free energy change is negative. That means it is feasible. It can be spontaneously taken place. So the difference between starting point and the end point of this curve's bottom part, that represent you delta G 0. So now delta G 0 is this one, and which obviously is negative. So as long as this curve is below this curve, delta G should be negative. Okay. Now I want you to do another interesting exercise with this curve. I want a process. What process we are talking about? Photoinduced electron transfer, right? So I want this electron transfer and electron transfer associated free energy change. Any process will have a associated free energy change. So in this particular case, we are talking about photoinduced electron transfer and associated free energy change. I want this process to become more and more negative. In other words, I want you to plot, forget about this, only these two curves, and then I want you to draw different diagrams in such a way that delta G 0 becomes more and more negative. Keep this position same. Think about altering this position in such a way that delta G 0 becomes more and more negative. You are going to see something which is very, very peculiar. Try it out. So PSGCT, any student want to share the idea, how do we decrease the delta G, or how we go more negative delta G? How do we represent that?
If we reduce the B point, we can get more negative value.
Very good, very good. BEC?
BEC? Repeat the question.
The question is, for the same process, photoinduced electron transfer, I want to reduce the delta G. I want to go more negative delta G.
Negative delta G.
How do I represent in this graph?
So difference should be less.
The difference less or more? Difference between the curves?
Less or more? Less. Difference between the curves?
Okay, let us go to the board. So what we said is, this difference is delta G 0. Now it is negative because it is B minus A. I wanted to make it more negative. If you want more negative, I want to make this difference more. Basically, I want to pull this down, further down. So I will get a value somewhere here, and this B dash minus A will be a larger negative value. So my intention is to make this process more and more negative delta G. So in other words, I want you to pull this curve down. In other words, I can draw it here. So one is here, I initially draw here, there will be some difference, and this difference is given the delta G. If I want to decrease it further, I will pull it down. So I am going to draw another one. So now if I take the difference between this point and this point, obviously I will have a more negative delta G value. I want you to do the same thing again and again. Bring this down, pull this down, see what can be happen. You keep the same procedure, do it for probably 3-4 times, bring it down and see what you are observing. Do it for me. Once you draw the 2-3 plots, look at the activation energy of each of them. Fantastic. BSR Revati replied. Other colleges? Very good. Energy may become equal to the ground energy. That may not happen. I am not showing the ground energy level. Now come to the board. As you rightly pointed out, see, initially this was the activation barrier. Second one, the activation barrier is this one. Now if I further decrease, this is the barrier. If I further decrease, no barrier, there is no barrier. So that's called barrier-less reaction. That means, so suppose I write A, B, C and D. I want you to comment on the rate of this electron transfer. Arrange it in the order of increasing rate of electron transfer. A, B, C, D. What is the order of increasing rate? 30 seconds. So one college says DCBA. Is it the increasing order of rate? The speed with which the process happens. ABCD is the right answer, because the speed with which any process depends upon whether the barrier is high or low, because the electron has to jump over the barrier. It's like hurdles. If it is a big hurdle, it takes more time to jump on it. If it is very less, you can go very fast. So as go from A, B, C, D, the activation barrier is coming less and less, and up to D there is no barrier at all. So this process will be very fast. The rate of this electron transfer will be very fast for D. I hope it is clear now. Now I am going to request you for one more step, which needs some creativity. I want you to further decrease this curve and see what happens. Decrease the second curve further and see what happens. To both free energy, Gibbs energy and activation energy. Gibbs energy is 0. How it becomes 0? Gibbs energy is the energy difference between the end point of the second curve and the bottom point of the second curve and the bottom point of the first one. It's already very negative because they are far apart. And some college says, VECAP college says activation increases. That's a very good answer. What will happen to Gibbs energy? They say Gibbs energy decreases. Why should? We are pulling that second curve down only. As long as the second curve goes down, the difference is increasing. So Gibbs energy cannot decrease. Can the Gibbs energy decrease? Because we are not shifting it up. Throughout the process, we are pulling the second curve down only. Okay, come to the board. But I am happy that one college says the answer. So I am pulling it down further. I am pulling it further down. I am pulling it further down. So what happens? D, E, F. If you see that D, E, F, there is an activation barrier built up. So if you want something to come to this next curve, it has to climb this way and then jump, or this way and then come. So in one, initially it was like this, now it is like this. That is the only difference. But there is an activation barrier building up. In other words, the more delta G becomes negative, you say the reaction becomes spontaneous, and the reaction and even though thermodynamics and kinetics doesn't have a correlation, the assumption is that the more delta G becomes negative, the reaction becomes faster. That's called linear free energy relationship, right? But in this particular case, what you are seeing is, it is not. There is a certain period to which, as we said, rate was very fast. When it reached here, activation was 0, so rate was very fast, electron transfer rate. But if you still reduce the free energy negative, actually the rate will become decrease, because there is a barrier you are building. So now I want you to plot. Ideally you need to put L and K, but for the simplicity I am just putting electron transfer rate constant versus delta G 0, negative. This is 0, this is +1, -1, -2, -3. This is the electron transfer rate constant, PET rate. Plot rate versus delta G, Gibbs energy change. how does this plot look like? From this graph you will be able to do it. I want you to comment on the shape of the graph. So one college says linear with increasing, another college says downward parabola. The one scientist got Nobel Prize for just plotting this graph. BSAR Revati says upper parabola. No, they said they changed it inverted parabola, downward parabola. Yeah, I think that is the right answer. So we'll come to the board. So as we said initially, the activation energy is decreasing. So what will happen to the rate? Rate will increase. Okay, and when it becomes barrierless, rate will be maximum. So a maximum value. Still you decrease the negative delta G. You are still pushing it to negative values, but then you are building an activation here. So the rate will decrease. So it will decrease. So the rate energy, the photo-induced electron transfer rate and the relation with the Gibbs energy was established theoretically by a professor called Rudolf Marcus. That was happening during 50s or early 60s, and at that point there was no experimental verification for this prediction. He theoretically predicted this. Later, after 30 years, a group of scientists, they did the experiment and then proved that his prediction was correct. And then in 1991, I think Marcus was awarded Nobel Prize in chemistry for this particular relation between rate of electron transfer versus delta G. Now in our context, why it is important is, when we are developing a sensor based on fluorescence, okay, our intention is that fluorescence intensity will decrease as a result of electron transfer. Now electron transfer will happen or not depends upon delta G. So when you design this donor and acceptor systems A and Q, we may go for a delta G difference of very negative, thinking that it will quench the fluorescence. But if it is happening in this region, that electron transfer rate is very low, that means that process will not happen, takes place, and result there is no quenching. Quenching may not happen. So understanding the fundamental aspects of electron transfer or fluorescence quenching will basically help you to design what kind of molecular systems we need to pick up for developing sensors based on this particular spectroscopic technique. So that's the reason why we went detailed. So fundamental understanding is, without that all the designs will be very poor. So you need to see, so if you want to design a fluorescence based sensor which is working on quenching mechanism, quenching will be very high when the electron transfer rate is very high. That means on the top of this curve, that happens here when the activation barrier is 0. So you can think of different systems, and then even before doing the experiment you can calculate the delta G, Gibbs energy change of that system. There are methods available to calculate delta G, and that will tell you whether your system is having activation very less. Okay, so there is a relation between the activation barrier and free energy. Without understanding this, you cannot design the systems. Now let us go back to the slide again. I think we need to discuss about one more thing, which is about energy transfer. Okay, before going to the slide, come back to the board again. So this is one reason, one main reason for quenching electron transfer. FRET is Foster resonance energy transfer. That also leads to fluorescence quenching. Let us see how it is. Two molecules A and B. A is in the excited state. So 1 electron here, 1 electron here. B has 2 electrons here. In the energy transfer mechanism, whatever the energy that this A molecule is having, it transfers this energy to B. So after energy transfer, FET is a particular type of energy transfer. After energy transfer, what you see is A in the ground state and B in the excited state. So initially you start with A in the excited state and B in the ground state. You end up in the reverse order because energy of A is getting transferred to B. So B will be in the excited state now. That is why we said B star. How does it happen? When A star and B come close, these electrons will try to come down. Normal case it is called fluorescence. But while it come down, the dipole of this electron can interact with the dipole of this electron. It's like magnets. Electron is a tiny magnet. The dipole of this magnet can interact with the dipole of this magnet and then displace this while it comes down. So it's like it will jump down here, as a result it goes up here. So this situation will happen. So the important thing about FET is that there is no light emission during the FET. Even though this electron is coming down, it is not emitting any photon. Because of dipole-dipole interaction, this electron is pushing this electron up. It's like when you bring two magnets together, sometimes it repulses if it is the same pole, if you bring down. So similarly, this electron come down and this electron goes up. There is no photon emission, there is no light emission during this process. But as a result, energy is transferred from one molecule to another molecule. So what will happen to the fluorescence of this one in the presence and absence of B? So you have A star, you excite it, it normally gives emission. You add B, B is getting energy, or the A's energy is transferred to B. So a fraction of the molecule's energy is transferred to B. So what will happen to the fluorescence of A star? It decreases, fluorescence quenching. So fluorescence quenching can also happen due to this energy transfer phenomena, which is called FRET. Now I want you to check whether you understand the mechanism of FRET. For that, what I want you to do is plot a graph. I will show you the features of absorbance and emissions of A and B separately. Then I will ask you to plot what will happen if I excite A in a mixture of A and B. For example, this 200 to say 300, this is the absorption spectrum of A. This is absorbance, this is the absorption spectrum of A. This is the corresponding emission spectrum, 300 to 350, this is lambda, emitting like this. This is also emission spectrum of A, this is absorption spectrum of A. I am going to give you the absorption spectrum of B, that is 350 to say 400. So this is the absorption spectrum of B. I will give you the emission spectrum of B also, 400 to 500. This is the emission spectrum of B. If you take individually A and B in separate cuvettes, this is how you get. My question is, suppose you excite a mixture of A and B, where A absorb the light and it transfer the light to B. I want you to draw the emission spectrum of this mixture and tell me where the lambda maximum is. So what I want you to draw is the emission spectrum of A plus B. Show the graph. Four graphs, or maybe 5 graphs, yeah, all of them. Correct. So it is like you are exciting A, and excitation, the energy of this A is transferred to B. This happens very quickly. Bathochromic shift, lambda shift to right. To a certain extent that is correct, but the 4 spectra that I have shown on the board, one of the spectra will resemble to the mixture. Can you identify? So out of the 4 spectra I have shown in the board, can you, 4th spectrum? Okay, BSAR Revati says 4th spectrum. I am asking why you pick up the 4th spectrum, what is the reason? The answer is correct, 4th spectrum is the answer. But now the question comes, why do you pick up that? Lambda is maximum. I mean the highest shift that is happening. Well, that is not the right interpretation. Okay, so let us go to the board again. So what we said is, we have a mixture of A and B, right? And you are exciting A. A absorbs the energy from the light, it goes to excited state, it transfers the energy to B. So now who has the energy? B has the energy, or B is in the excited state. So eventually who will emit light, A or B? B will emit, because B has the higher energy. A had the energy, but that energy is transferred to B. Now B has the energy, so automatically B is going to emit. So the mixture emission spectra will look like the emission spectra of B, because B is the one that is emitting. So now you can use this concept of energy transfer for sensing mechanism, that we are going to discuss that. But the important thing that you need to understand is, when you have a mixture of 2 species which are capable of energy transfer phenomena, you excite one species which absorb the light, transfer that energy to another species, and the second species is going to emit. So the color that you are seeing from a mixture is always B, even though you are exciting A. Now this is a hypothetical situation where all the energy of A is transferred to B. It may not happen, partial energy transfer is possible. So in that case what you see is, so you excite A emits some energy in the form of light, some energy is transferred to B, B also emit. So initially only, suppose there is only A, you get a spectrum like this. Now you have B and A, some energy is transferred to B, so A energy is quenched, B energy is coming up. Again you add another case where more energy transfer happens. So what happens? A is getting decreased, B is getting increased. So this peak will go down, this peak will come up. So this kind of a transition is also possible by partial energy transfer phenomena. Any signal change can be utilized for sensing mechanism, that is a clue. So both quenching, where the signal is getting quenched or a signal is getting shifted, these are the ideas or principles behind sensing mechanism based on fluorescence. So both energy, electron transfer and energy transfer can be utilized. So now let us go to the slides again. Now I want you to think about development of an idea using fluorescence for sensing toxic metal ions in water. So you learned about electron transfer and energy transfer, signaling, signal quenching, signal shifting. I want you to discuss each other and then come up with an idea of developing a fluorescent based sensor for detecting toxic metal ions. Go ahead and come up with, take 2-3 minutes. But the problem here is the specificity will be very difficult because many metal ions will quench the emission. So it's like you don't have a specificity, we cannot call it as a sensor. You have mercury, lead, copper, zinc, everything will quench. So that is one issue with the suggestion, but still to begin with that can be utilized as a. We have a question from DGI. Yeah, question DGI.
Sir, PET reaction in homogeneous solution is low. Why?
PET in homogeneous solution is low. So where did you get this sentence? Is it a case where you found in a research article, or where did you get this sentence? PET in homogeneous solution is low. Because we haven't discussed whether it is in a homogeneous or heterogeneous medium. Depends upon the system and the free energy change, electron transfer can be very fast or medium or slow. So I want to get the context of your sentence, the question, then only I can answer it. So yeah, electron transfer in homogeneous, there is no universal rule saying that in homogeneous it will be very slow. There can be cases where electron transfer can be very fast in homogeneous. It can happen, heterogeneous also it can be very fast, homogeneous it can happen very fast. So one of the conditions probably what you are looking is in homogeneous solution usually electron transfer happens through a phenomena called diffusion. So the two molecules have to come close in a solution for electron transfer. So such a phenomena is called diffusion controlled electron transfer. So what happened is that the rate of electron transfer is actually constrained by the diffusion rate. In such cases, what you observe experimentally is the rate of diffusion, not the rate of electron transfer. That can be one possibility for your question.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one more
Yep.
question.
Haha.
So what is exciner or excipient?
So yesterday we discussed briefly about Xcimer and Xc plus. Both are excited state complexes, loosely bound excited state complexes. Suppose you have a species fluorophore called A, you excite A, this excited A pick up a ground state A, form a complex. That's called Xcimer, excited state dimer. In some other cases you have a A and B. So excited A will form a complex with the ground state B. That is called Xcplex, excited state complex. Okay, BC.
Due to gold nanoculture.
Say it again, please.
Can use for gold nanoculture. Gold nanocluster based fluorescent sensor we can use to detect.
Okay. How?
So I will use.
Okay, I think I am gold nano cluster based fluorescent sensor. Very good thought. How do you? Can you elaborate on that? How do you plan a gold nano cluster based sensor?
The etching induced fluorescence quenching of gold nanoclusters.
So one of the ways is you can think of a gold nano cluster which is emitting, and then if it specifically binds any metal ion, it reduces the fluorescence quenching. I think that was the idea. It's not bad, that can be, but then you need to think what metal ion it specifically binds. So the chemistry of nano clusters or nanoparticles comes to picture. If it binds every metal ion, then you cannot develop a sensor based on that. But the basic idea, as you said, quenching can be used. So these are the two, see the slide, these are the two ideas usually people use to develop sensors based on fluorescence. The first one is the one that you have told me. So there is a fluorophore, if you shine light it emits. So this is fluorescent on state. Now you have a receptor here, if it is gold nanoparticle be on the surface, and now here is your black box, is your metal ion, toxic metal. It comes and binds. Now what happens, the interaction is between this fluorophore and the toxic metal ion. As a result, fluorescence is quenched, fluorescence is off state. That can be a sensing or a detection mechanism. A more another way is, initially the fluorescence is off state, there is a dye molecule but it is encapsulated. As a result of this encapsulation, this interaction between the dye and this cap, it is not emitting in the beginning. Now analyte is coming, the toxic metal ion, it basically displays this dye from this region, dye comes out. Once dye comes out, it starts emitting. Now both works on off mechanism. The only thing is that the first case, initially it is on, finally it is off. Below case, initially it is off, finally it is on. Question comes to you, which one is a better design and why you say so? So think about this question, which one is a better design? Because we are talking about developing a sensor. I am showing you two different designs and ask you to pick up the best one with a justification. PSGCT, you have selected second design. What could be the reason? Somebody must have picked up second one, so there must be an answer. VECAP also says second one. So now let us go to, they are telling, not hearing. Hello PSGCT? Say it again please. Okay, we will go to another call. Says second one because we can view the fluorescent emission. It consumes more energy. It consumes, PSGCT says it consumes more energy. Well, both cases, the first one consumes more energy. How is it that possible? Both cases there is a light energy given, it absorbs. Initially there was an emission, later there was no emission, or initially there was no emission, later there was an emission. So I think energy exchanges are more or less the same. But BSR Revati has a point, second one because we can view the fluorescent emission. Now my question is, why viewing fluorescence is a better option? Your answer is correct. BSAR Revati, where is BSAR Revati? BSAR Revati. Oh, you don't have a video. Okay. So, your answer is correct. If I am designing, I would go for the second one. The reason is, so initial design, what happened is that there is a fluorescence quenching, and second one there is a fluorescence turn on, right? Now both can be utilized. A better option is turn on, second option. The reason is, turning on fluorescence is more specific than quenching. Quenching can happen with any black box, any metal ion, or any of the molecules. When it interacts, even simple collision can lead to quenching. So here in the first case, specificity will be very low. You add any species, fluorescence will be slightly quenched. So we cannot say that it is specifically because of one particular interaction. Whereas in the second case, this kind of a displacement is very specific. So only one particular type of analyte can displace this dye from this kind of a cap, or in a similar situation and take the dye out and give the fluorescence. So turn on fluorescence is very specific in nature most of the cases. That is the reason why second option is preferred. Okay, look at the slide and tell me what you are observing. You can even type in the chat. It's a sensor, fluorescence based sensor. So from the slide, just tell me what you understand as the mechanism of sensing. So mercury sensing. Mechanism is quenching. That is true. PS GCT says that mechanism is quenching. PSR Revati says they are not seeing the slide. They are not seeing the slide. Why is that? Oh, only this screen there's. That's okay. I'm showing the slide again. DGI? Yes.
Yes, sir. As the figure says that quenching is occurred, and in quenching the Hg molecule is converted into ion, and the quenching means that the interaction of fluorescence, which gives the more and more ion to detect and to predict internal matter or etc.
Okay. Let me go to the slide again. So what you are seeing here is your fluorophore on the right hand side and quencher on your left hand side connected by some kind of a linker molecule, where yesterday you remember there was a oligonucleotide with a mercury binding sequence. It can be any, some chemical species which can have very affinity towards mercury. Now this is a linear chain. So when you excite, fluorescence will emit light, fluorophore will emit light, so it is fluorescing. Upon addition of mercury, what happened, this linear chain is going to make a bend structure, because mercury is going to bind on this linker as well as this linker. It acts as a connector. So as you can see in the second case, several of mercury ions act as a connector. So as a result, this linear chain is going to bend. When you bend, what happens? The fluorophore and the quencher comes to proximity. They come to close to each other. When they come to close to each other, they can interact, either electron transfer or energy transfer. Many mechanisms you can think of. In this particular case, FRET is happening. That means resonance energy transfer. Foster resonance energy transfer is happening. As a result, energy is transferred from fluorophore to this quencher, and as a result, fluorescence will be decreased, quenched. But because these binding sites are very specific for mercury, if you add zinc or lead or anything, nothing will happen. Probably lead and zinc will directly interact with this fluorophore and fluorescence can be quenched, but this FRET will not happen. In FRET, what happens? Not only the fluorescence of this fluorophore is quenched, you may get an emission from the quencher. Remember the AB mixture spectrum? Your emission from this A is quenched, but you may get an emission from B. So even if you add lead or other things which can interact with the fluorophore here and quench this emission, that will not lead to FRET. This resonance energy transfer happens only in presence of mercury. So it becomes very specific. That is the idea. Okay. I will give you another example. So here is a particular structure, naphthalimide kind of structure with nitrogen atoms which can actually bind copper 2+. So before this the green is the color. Upon addition of copper, the emission color becomes blue. So the molecule emission changes from green to blue upon binding with the copper. So as a result, this is the initial emission, this was the initial emission, and then it shifts to this one. So whatever color you are seeing is the emission color, not the absorbance. So initial color emission is 550, that is a green color. Now upon addition of copper, that color will decrease. Another peak is coming here as a result of complex. In complex, charge transfer happens. That means it is not electron transfer, partial electron transfer. So partial electron transfer from these nitrogen atoms to the copper metal ion happens, so it will be delta plus and delta minus. As a result, that species can absorb light and emit, which is different from the parent compound. So now you can see that there is a ratiometric change. That means as you increase the concentration of the conjure, another peak is coming accordingly. So you can even calculate the binding constants or other things you can find out from this spectral analysis, but mostly it can sense copper ions. Such kind of a specific binding may not happen with other metal ions. That is the idea. Okay. So the remaining 5 minutes I can give you. You generate multiple ideas for developing a sensor for detecting toxic metal ions using the principles of UV visible and fluorescence spectroscopy. You can take it as a home assignment. So what I want is, you have come up already with ideas about very general strategies, like it can be quenching, it can be spectral shift, which is correct, which is fine with the beginning. But if you want to develop a sensor, you got to be very specific. So you need to come up with the structure of a molecule or a nano system, and then see why it is specifically binding a particular toxic metal ion, what is the chemistry behind it. As a result of this binding, what way I get a signal, what change I can get in a signal. So this more detailed plan is required to develop a sensor based on UV visible or fluorescence or any other technique. Sensor development is not easy because of the specificity which it demands. It cannot detect all the metal ions in the water, then it loses its specificity. So your target, for example, in India northeast part, arsenic is a very important, very toxic metal ions in the groundwater. So we can think of developing a sensor which can detect arsenic metal ion very specifically. So like that, I mean, many places water is contaminated, and water purification is a kind of a research program currently India is taking up. So think about developing different kind of sensors where you can detect these toxic metal ions in the water very specifically. So that's where chemistry comes. It doesn't matter whether engineer or anybody is developing this, the chemistry between the binding has to be clear. So you can use UV visible spectroscopy or fluorescence spectroscopy based on the knowledge of the spectroscopy and the type of mechanism of interaction, and then develop a sensor or any other technique. The most important thing about a sensor is, upon sensing you should get a signal, and that signal should be very specific to that particular analyte. These are the only conditions. So now for the remaining time, I invite questions from you. We can have a chat, question answer session, or I can give you this remaining thing. Why don't you just write down these two things from today's class? One aspect which was most clear to you, one aspect which was completely unclear to you. This will help you to sort out the questions. Okay, there was one question, how to avoid back electron transfer. It's a very good question, because scientists over decades are working on how to stop the back electron transfer. Once you excite a species, it go to the excited state, gives the electron to the other species, but moment it comes back. One of the ways to prevent back electron transfer, the strategy is that once the electron goes from A to B, provide a C where B can push this electron to C, and provide a D where C can put this electron to D. So there can be a hopping mechanism through which the distance between A and D is so large that this electron coming back is of less probable. That is one strategy that people are adopting to prevent back electron transfer. So there is another question, static and dynamic quenching is clear. Okay, what is unclear? There is a question, is your lecture video available? Yes, it is available. So we'll go by college.
Can we analyze the soil of other planet with the help of spectroscope?
Can we analyze what?
Soil.
Soil, okay.
Soil of other planet by the help of spectroscope.
Okay, so can we analyze the soil of another planet by spectroscopic methods? So as of now, spectroscopic methods, we are focusing on a sample which is you are putting in the spectroscopic machine, right. So if you have a soil sample from some other place, okay, you can analyze it. So you can bring that soil to a spectrometer. There are solid state sample analysis. Whatever we have discussed in solution phase, but the same kind of analysis we can use in solid state also. You can have absorption spectrum of solids, you can have emission of solids. So in principle, the answer for your question is yes, it is possible. So there is a chat saying that how to choose the fluorophore. So the fluorophore is basically chosen based on the emission spectrum of the fluorophore. Most of the time we prefer a fluorophore in the visible emitting region, so that the signal is visible, green or blue or red. Another question, explain about the Foster resonance energy transfer. So Foster resonance energy transfer is a mechanism through which a fluorophore is transferring its energy to a quencher. So as a result, quencher can emit. So you excite fluorophore, you get emission from quencher. One of the important things about Foster resonance energy transfer is that it is a distance dependent phenomena. If the distance, so it's very sensitive to the distance between donor and acceptor. In fact, it is related by inversely proportional to 1 to the power of r to the power 6. That means the distance slightly changes, the efficiency and the rate with which the energy transfer happens is drastically changed. So there is a very strong distance dependence between the energy transfer and distance between the fluorophore and the quencher. As a result, this Foster resonance energy transfer is used in biology for lot of experiments to find out the distance between two units in a macromolecule, like protein structure, understanding the protein structure, how this big molecule is folding. So all these cases, to find out the distance between two units, resonance energy transfer is widely utilized. In fact, it is called biological ruler. Ruler means scale. So it acts as a scale to measure the distance between units in a big molecule. There was one more question in the chat. Could you explain Gibbs energy change versus rate constant? For photoinduced electron transfer, what we have seen here is, as the Gibbs energy becomes more and more negative, there is a initial increase in the rate of electron transfer, reaches a maximum, and then it comes down. So it is an inverted parabola relation. So this relation was first explained by Rudy Marcus. He says that just because Gibbs energy is negative, it does not mean that always rate will increase. There are conditions at which, when you push the system to more negative Gibbs energy, the inverse will happen, the rate will decrease. So that is that phenomena was discovered by Marcus, and that particular region where the electron transfer rate is decreasing is called Marcus inverter region. There's another question, explain about biosensors. Okay, biosensors itself is a short course. We can think of using molecular systems or even nanoparticle systems which can sense in a biological system toxic metal ions. So you can think of attaching these nanosystems to proteins which can go to any of these cell, which can cross this cell membrane, penetrate this cell membrane, go inside the cell, and whenever the toxic metal ion comes, it can interact and give you a signal. That's called that's the basic principle of biosensing. Another question, how to choose the quencher for a particular fluorophore? That's a good question. It depends upon the mechanism of quenching. Suppose you want a electron transfer quenching, then you decide a quencher in such a way that the free energy is slightly negative. We know that it cannot be too large negative, because if it too large negative, it goes to Marcus inverter region, rate may be very low, but a reasonable negative free energy change is needed for electron transfer to happen. If you want a FRET, then there are some other conditions to satisfy, and one of the conditions is they have to be very close to each other, and the emission spectra of the donor should be overlapping with the acceptor's absorption spectra. So there are a few conditions to be satisfied to select a quencher for FRET. And if you can even Google it, what are the conditions, what are the parameters for efficient FRET. There are 3 parameters. One is the distance, another one is the spectral overlap, third one is called orientation of dipoles. So if the orientation of the dipoles are in a particular way, it can either support the rate of efficiency of FRET, or it can actually decrease the efficiency of FRET. So these 3 parameters controls the efficiency of FRET. So every time when you ask this question, what is the criteria to select a quencher, it depends upon what type of mechanism of quenching are you looking at. So somebody is raising a question. Go to PSGCT. Have a question?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
Talked about the excited electron in a certain level that is going on. So is it possible if we apply a pulsing light at that excited electron oscillates at desired? Is that possible?
I am only hearing is it possible. I am not hearing the question. Can you type it? I think PSGCT, the signal is very weak. I am not able to hear the question.
Can you hear me?
Okay, there is. Tell me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You talked about retaining the excited electrons in certain electronic levels, and research is being held in that area. So is it possible if we supply a pulsating light such that electron, the excited electron, oscillates in that desired electronic level? Is that
Oh. Okay. You are asking, I will repeat the question, see whether it is correct or not. You are asking whether I can keep a pulse source of light so that the electron is always in the excited state. Yeah, so in fact that is what is utilized in the, it is possible. Answer is, you can create a steady state of fluorophore, that means a particular concentration always in the excited state, as long as you provide the source. But then energetically that is not a viable solution. Why? Because you have to always provide the source. So I am spending energy. So in that sense, that may not be a very attractive idea to generate something always in the excited state. But your thought is correct. You can keep it in the excited state. You are always like pumping energy and then keep it in the excited state. But to keep it there, you need to provide a constant source of energy, which is energetically that may not be a very viable or feasible solution. Okay, we can stop this interaction. There is a question. Which sensor are now in use to clean the rivers? Well, I mean, there are several sensors on a research ground. If you look at the research journals, every month hundreds of research papers are coming, regarding sensing. But developing into a feasible technology is not very not easy. But there are sensors. For example, every one of you have a water purification system in your house, right? There is something like a box, you run the water through, you connect it to the tap water, and then you push on the button, you get a clean water. So you can make it open and then see what is the sensor there. There will be a black tube, and then if your parents allow, you cut it open. That will be containing some porous materials, carbon based mostly, to absorb this toxic species, bacteria and other things. So there are commercially viable solutions here. What researchers are trying to see is to see whether you can have more efficient sensors. Many of these things cannot detect in small amount, parts per million, parts per billion kind of amount. If you want to check something, you need to still develop more sensors. Somebody is having a question, Dronacharya. Okay, DGI.
Sir, what are the limitations of ultraviolet spectroscopy?
Limitations. So if you want to develop a sensor based on UV visible spectroscopy, well, the limitation is not about the spectroscopy issue, but designing a molecule which can have a good absorption, molar extinction coefficient in that region, that can be a challenge. So I don't want it to list as a limitation, but it's a challenge for you to design a molecule which has very high molar extinction coefficient. That can be one thing. And then sometimes your system may absorb in the UV region or maybe far UV region. So in the UV visible spectrophotometry has a range from 200 to say 900. If your system falls either this end or that end, you cannot use this particular spectroscopic technique. And the fundamental limitations about Beer-Lambert's law, as we already pointed out, is it works for dilute solutions. So if you have a very concentrated solution, Beer-Lambert's law cannot be applied. So these are the limitations.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. How to lower the potential energy of B in the graph of potential energy versus reactant coordinates. How to lower the potential energy of B in the graph? That's a very good question. I have shown you only a case of decreasing the energy, but I didn't tell you how you do that. It's not very difficult. All that we are talking about is a process from A to B. Electron is getting transferred from A to B. So the delta G, the difference between the Gibbs energy, is a function of how the electron is, what is the ionization potential of the donor and what is the electron affinity of the acceptor. So even though it is just one potential energy diagram, I can think of slightly chemically modifying it. I can introduce a cyano group which withdraw electron density, or a nitro group, or if you put amino group on the other side, it pushes more electron density. So based on my chemistry knowledge, I can slightly alter, chemically modify A and B. As a result, these curves will go up and down. But that's a very good question. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, time is up. I really enjoyed the interaction with you for the last 3 days. I hope you also enjoyed the sessions. Give your feedback. I was experimenting about these interactive sessions on videos, but I strongly believe that unless students work on something, just by listening you cannot educate yourself. So if you permit me, I have another meeting to conduct now. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
you.